Velkommen til Rig på Viden, din podcast om investering, finans og økonomi. Mit navn er Benjamin Somofen.
Episoden har vi lavet i samarbejde med Nordic Finance and the Good Society for at kaste nyt lys på finanssektoren i Norden og diskutere en mere ansvarlig retning for sektoren i fremtiden. Målet om at udbrede forskning inden for området og skabe debat om den finansielle sektor støtter vi 100% op om. Tag et kig på deres hjemmeside nfgs.dk, hvor der ligger masser af fed forskning og seminarer om ledelse, bæredygtighed, pengepolitik og meget mere.
Have you ever got a financial advice? Did you follow it as well? Financial advice is the topic of today of Rig på Viden, and I've invited Oscar Stolper to the studio, who is a professor of behavioral finance at Marburg University in Germany. His main research focus is in empirical capital market research and behavioral finance. Oscar Stolper, welcome to.
Thanks, Benjamin. Thank you very much for having me. It's a pleasure to be here today.
Let's start very briefly. What is financial advice?
Well, what is financial advice? Well, essentially, financial advice is whenever a person receives recommendations when it comes to financial matters. It can be choosing the right mortgage contract or saving for old age, for instance. Many of us aren't capable or comfortable making such decisions on their own. And, that's why many of us rely on financial advice. And, financial advice generally can be from friends and family, obviously, or likewise from influencers lately, right? But oftentimes when we talk about financial advice, we think of the advice from trained professionals, from experts, either persons or in digital form, robo-advisors. Yeah.
I actually gave you some homework before the podcast, and I asked you to bring up the best financial advice you ever got.
That was an easy one, I would say. The best financial advice I've ever got was to invest in stocks, in fact.
And there's another thing, because there's a lot of people here who get financial advices, but did you also listen to it?
I did. As a matter of fact, I'm invested ever since.
Sounds great.
Yeah.
So let's take it in a more broad way. As you say, when we seek financial advice, it's by professional advisors. But can you put any practical example on which situations do we need financial advisors typically?
Absolutely. So financial advice is particularly valuable in situations that, do not happen so often during our lifetime. Particularly valuable in situations that are characterized as once in a lifetime decisions, such as, planning for old age, providing for, what happens after retirement, and also, or at least for many of us, choosing the right mortgage contract is maybe a once or a twice in a lifetime decision, but, not something that happens ever so often. So these are good examples for situations in which financial advice can add value.
And is this typically in the bank you got it, or can it also be from friends? Now you said your best advice was to invest in stocks, but I suppose you don't have to go into the bank to get somebody to advise you that?
That's perfectly right. It really depends on the complexity of the matter for which you seek advice. Sometimes, getting a nudge towards, say, investing for the first time can be some friendly advice, or can be reading a newspaper article and, just finding out that there's, some easy rules to adhere to. But when it comes to more complex matters, such as, once again, the mortgage or the pension plan, I would advise people to, look out for professional advice.
And today we're going to talk about financial advices, but for me it's also a quite niche topic. So how did you actually got interested in financial advices from the very beginning? Were you advised for that? Or
that's a good question, actually. Well, to begin with, financial advice is very closely linked to my field of research, which is behavioral finance, right? Now, behavioral finance teaches us that people make costly mistakes when it comes to financial decisions. And that's due to emotional biases, for one, That's due to cognitive errors and maybe even most importantly, due to a lack of discipline, right? People tend not to stick to their plan. And financial advice can help in these instances. And I've always been curious about, whether in the first place and then to what extent financial advice does in fact countersteer all sorts of emotional biases and cognitive errors and whatnot, which we observe when it comes to the financial behavior of individuals.
If I should label behavioral finance when you put your kind of analysis on financial advices, is it to find irrational behavior on consumers? Or what would you say your main research assumptions typically are?
Again, good question. I wouldn't go as far as to say people behave irrationally, right? At some point, behavioral finance was all about boundedly rational individuals. I have a somewhat different take. I'm saying behavioral finance is normal finance, essentially. And why is that? Because it characterizes normal human beings, mere mortals such as you and me, right? That is a far cry from, the traditional finance theory, which comes up with, fully informed, machine-like rational agents that are able to process all sorts of information in real time and whatnot. And, this is not us, obviously. So it's important to characterize the financial decisions of human beings. And that's what behavioral finance is all about.
How many years have you been at the university studying behavioral finance? And researching.
Yeah. So, the first steps probably during my graduate studies, and that dates back more than 20 years, actually, or actually close to 20 years. And then ever since 2009, I'm a university faculty, and over the last 10 years or so, I've focused on the topics of financial advice, financial literacy, and all sorts of investment mistakes by individuals and households.
So we have 10 to 20 years experience within the field. Can you say anything about how has financial advisors and the research about it changed the recent 10 years?
So I would say academic research into financial advice has changed the landscape quite a bit. Back in the days, we started out looking at whether or not financial advisors deliver on their value proposition of acting in the best interests of clients. Maybe a somewhat weird question, right? But the reason was that the way financial advisors are being compensated carries a number of conflicts of interests, right? And we wanted to learn whether these conflicts of interests are being exploited by financial advisors, right? For instance, that they would recommend products that for which they receive the highest kickbacks rather than products that are in the best interest of the client. And this research, in fact, has had quite some impact in the sense that the financial or the regulatory authorities in financial services have installed all sorts of limits to kickback payments. For instance, there's bans on kickbacks in some European countries already. Others have tried to commoditize, to standardize financial advice, at least retail financial advice to a large extent. So that is really something that emerges from this field of research around conflicts of interest, right? And then later on, the research has focused on the client-advisor interaction and specifically on the role of the advisor and what he or she actually brings to the table when it comes to this interaction. This is something which I'm very much interested in, and lots of my current research is actually about the role of the advisor, essentially.
And what is the proper role of the advisor?
Now, sound financial advice is all about an advisor that, of course, acts in the best interests of the clients in the sense that he or she does not exploit any conflicts of interests. And, much has improved along these lines over the last couple of years. I would argue that a good financial advisor is a behavioral coach in many ways. What do I mean by that? Well, a good financial advisor ideally prevents people from fire selling their assets when, markets plummet. A good financial advisor prevents people from churning their portfolios too, excessively. A good financial advisor directs individuals into assets that really reflect their risk attitude. That's also something which can be, or the whole idea of risk-return relationship can be improved and ameliorated by financial advice. Oftentimes we see that the portfolios of self-directed individuals, so individuals that trade without receiving any advice, that they are very much tilted towards risky assets, and that this, for instance, does not reflect the true risk attitude of these people. So these are examples for the value added of financial advice.
I think it sounds rather fairly that financial advisors keep you away from doing irrational short-term behaviors, fire selling when market goes down. But I suppose there's also some instances where people still do it, since it's a part of your research area. So can we in general say, do people not listen to financial advisors, or why can there be any divergence between the advisor and the one who seeks advice?
I mean, yes, oftentimes advice is not entirely being followed, right? It's not entirely being adhered. From some of our research, we know that advice is either being followed or it isn't. So oftentimes it's a binary choice to adhere to the recommendations of your financial advisor. And depending on the kind of financial advice, right, whether we're looking at pension advice, for instance, or whether we're looking at investment advice, the percentages of individuals that follow financial advice, and now I'm speaking for Germany, in fact, but maybe things are somewhat comparable here in Denmark. So the percentages range from less than half of advisees, maybe some 35% or something like that when it comes to pension advice or insurance advice, up to, some 50, 60%, depending on the scenario when it comes to investment advice, right? So these are this is the average likelihood of following financial advice. Yeah. So yes, seeking financial advice does not necessarily mean that this advice is being followed. And I mean, of course, financial advice can be as beneficial as possible and as good as possible. It's worthless unless it's followed, right?
We already digged a bit into your current work and your current paper, but could you in general say the unspoken and give a brief introduction on which part of the literature you're working on right now?
Sure, absolutely. Currently, I'm interested in how an individual's risk attitude is being elicited during the KYC process in a financial advisory meeting. So the Know Your Customer, the KYC process, is mandatory for retail financial advice here in Europe, and it entails eliciting the client's risk attitude, right? Where risk attitude essentially means what is the risk capacity of the individual, what financial assets are there, what income is there, that would count towards the capacity. And then the other component that sort of feeds into the risk tolerance is risk attitude, essentially, right? And that essentially means what keeps me awake at night in terms of losses, for instance, and that can be very different from one person to another, right? And it certainly does not depend it doesn't depend on the amount of financial assets which a person owns, or the income which a person earns or whatnot. And these two components, they have to be elicited at some point, and most of us have a very hard time determining their risk tolerance, right? What is my risk attitude?
But usually you just get a box, is it low, medium, or high?
Exactly. But even then, right, most of us feel uncomfortable indicating whether we have a medium, high, or low risk tolerance, and typically you have a number of different questions, and what we observe is that many individuals, many advisees, turn to their advisors for guidance on how to fill in the risk questionnaire, right? And preliminary results which we have obtained from real world data, right, they paint a pretty clear picture, namely that there is such thing as an advisor effect on the level of risk that is actually being elicited by the clients of that advisor. So that means two otherwise very much comparable, maybe even identical persons receive different risk scores depending on which advisor they consult with. And this is, first off, that shouldn't be the case. And second, that's critical. And why is this? Well, because the risk level, the risk score maps all the way into your portfolio holdings, right? And depending on, what you are up to, right? Say you are pursuing a buy and hold strategy and you want to allocate your assets for old age provision. Even tiny little differences in the risk scores can have a huge effect over decades, right? Over 20, 30, even 40 years. So that is certainly something which we have to dig a bit deeper into, and this is what we're doing right now.
Yeah. So can you already say how come that people with same risk tolerance get different risk?
Our results are suggestive of what we refer to as a false consensus bias, right? So apparently the advisor believes that his or her, way of looking at things is what they find in their clients as well, right? And false consensus in the sense that the degree to which they believe that their clients are similar to them is inflated, right? It doesn't match reality.
So in theory, actually, you can go to the same company, ask for financial advice, get a KYC process, but then the outcome will depend on which of the financial advisors by high probability.
Right. So this is what emerges, or this is what we obtain from the data of a bank, of a mid-sized savings bank in Germany. And we're not yet ready to be able to generalize that to the entire landscape of banks in Germany or even beyond. But yeah, so what we do is we look into almost 2,500 in-person advisory meetings and look at the outcome of the risk elicitation process and compare clients that are otherwise very similar and look into their risk scores and find that the risk scores do depend on the person with which they consult. Specifically, we find that clients that consult with young male advisors feature systematically higher risk scores, whereas clients that consult with elderly female advisors feature systematically lower risk scores. And this is certainly something which, again, we have to look into a bit deeper because, of course, that countersteers the idea of standardized financial advice and of advice that is the same regardless of which advisor you consult with.
I think this is quite interesting, but I also know when you dive deep into a research topic, you also look out of the market, which else research have been made there. So when you say that men, they are more confident in the future and give more aggressive advice, is that in line what else we see in behavioral finance and also your other conclusions?
Right. So what we certainly see for male investors is that they are much more confident when it comes to their subjective knowledge about financial markets. And that holds true for investors now, right? So I'm not talking about professional advisors here, but first off, when it comes to retail investors specifically. So here, males are even overconfident, right? In the sense that their subjective knowledge about financial markets, what they perceive to know about financial markets is, a far cry from what they actually know about financial markets, right? So there's a huge gap between subjective financial knowledge and objective financial knowledge, which you can obtain by, asking persons quiz questions and, look into how many answers are correct, right? So that is a specific male thing. So we do have this male overconfidence when it comes to investment decisions and when it comes to trading, and that leads to all sorts of mistaken behavior. Excessive trading, for instance, used to be much more of a problem back in the days when transaction costs were quite a chunk of the return, or actually reduced returns by quite a bit. But still is a problem because excessive trading, for instance, sort of countersteers all sorts of buy and hold strategies, for instance. So yes, there is such thing as overconfidence with male investors. We don't find any evidence that there is overconfidence with male advisors. But what we do find is that advisors, and that holds true for both genders actually, oftentimes are led by what's referred to as misguided beliefs, right? That means they do act in the best interest, or many of them act in the best, actually the vast majority of them acts in the best interest of their clients. But oftentimes turns out that advisors themselves are, fall prey to many of the behavioral mistakes, to many of the investment mistakes investors themselves fall prey to. And this is also something that's attracted quite some research recently, as I mentioned before, right? So learning about the advisor, learning about who actually advises us and what they do and what their portfolios, for instance, their private portfolios look like, is something that's been done lately. And one influential study by 3 American colleagues found that financial advisors themselves, again, fall prey to the same biases, to the same cognitive errors as most retail investors, right? So their portfolios are characterized by a home bias. They trade excessively. They are under-diversified and whatnot.
But I also suppose if you're sitting there in the bank and you're or another financial advisor and you're seeking for investment advice, it's hard to get all the transactions from your advisor and ask, oh, hello, I suppose you might be under excessive trading since you are a male and even young as well. So how can you find these gaps or maybe be prepared?
Right. Good question. I mean, important, right? We've talked about averages here, and the individual that actually advises you need not necessarily behave according to this average, which we find. But yeah, the good question is how can we tell good financial advice, sound financial advice from financial advice that may not be so good for us? And I would argue that the best way is to acquire some financial literacy, right? That helps us bridging the information asymmetry between us and the financial advisor. And the good news is that it doesn't take you so much time to, learn the basics of investing, for instance. I would even argue that it's important to know what's not important when it comes to investing. So I would actually advise each and everyone to, get acquainted to the basic rules of sound investing, and then only afterwards see their financial advisor to make sure, that it's maybe not a level playing field, but that the information asymmetry is a bit smaller than before.
Time is going really quickly, but I still have a few questions left. So I just wanted to hear now, when you brought a lot of comments and observations on your research and the whole research space in general, were there any of your results which surprised you?
Yeah, absolutely. So that happens every now and then. Fortunately, I have to say, right? If all our hypotheses were just, being met, it wouldn't be as exciting, I suppose. Every now and then we have surprising results. One of them certainly being that birds of a feather flock together when it comes to financial advice, right? So in a large scale sample, again with real world data, we found that advice given by a financial advisor that is similar to me as a client in terms of a number of easily observable demographic characteristics, such as, age, gender, age more or less, right? So age cohort, once again, plus minus 5 years, gender, and marital status and things like that, that advice given by someone who's close to me in terms of these demographics is followed with a much higher likelihood than advice that's given by a financial advisor that's remote in terms of these socio-demographic characteristics. This is something which I find really surprising, because why should age cohort and gender and even marital status, why should they have any influence on the value of financial advice? But turns out that, the human factor does play a role, and individuals are behavioral. Once again, that's evidence of emotions governing our decisions. Mm-hmm.
We also hear that discussing some part when people they're recruiting new employees, they tend to find people who look like themselves.
That's right. Yeah, there is such thing as homophily when it comes to recruitment as well. That's right.
Do you have any last comments before we end?
I mean, I've focused on investment mistakes over the last 10, 15 years even. And what emerges as a very clear pattern is that sound investing is very simple investing, right? So if you were to extract the, say, 3 most important findings when it comes to, what people should not do and investment mistakes which people should not commit, I would say, don't buy costly products. Fees, they really pile up over the investment horizon. So don't buy costly products. Make sure to be diversified across a number of national economies, right? So internationally diversified, but also diversified and across a number of different sectors, right? So that would be probably the second recommendation: be diversified. Make sure to spread your money over a number of different assets. And third, stick to your plan, right? And that's probably the hardest part of it. Make sure, to view financial matters, investment matters as something that is, bound to be boring in a way, right? Get your thrills elsewhere, but not in the portfolio. I think that's important, right? So diversified, low-cost product, and then holding on to that product if it reflects your risk tolerance, and you're all set.
Thank you very much for the last comment and the financial advice.
Well, I mean, that wasn't financial advice, of course, right?
Of course not.
Exactly.
This is the disclaimer, of course.
Exactly. That was just some...
So, Oscar Stolper, thank you very much for joining this podcast episode of Fri på Viden.
Well, thank you, Benjamin. Again, thanks for having me. That was great fun.
My name is Benjamin Sumofen.
Tak for, at du lyttede med til Rig på Viden. Jeg håber, at du lærte noget, og hvis du nu synes godt af vores podcast, så kan du støtte os ved at følge den på Spotify eller skrive en anbefaling på iTunes. Inde på LinkedIn, der kan du følge André Thormand, Benjamin Sumofen eller Henrik Fode Rasmussen. På genhør.